I was standing in the coat check line at the Wellington Club when I heard her laugh. That specific musical laugh Emma reserved for people she wanted to impress. I'd heard it 1,000 times over our 3 years together, but never quite like this. Sharp, performative, the kind of laugh that cuts through marble halls and cigar smoke. I turned slightly, just enough to see her through the archway leading into the main dining room. She was with 3 women I recognized from her marketing firm, all of them dressed in that carefully calculated way that screamed 6-figure salaries and weekend brunches in the Hamptons. They were huddled around a corner table, champagne flutes catching the chandelier light, and Emma was holding court. I should have walked away. I should have collected my coat, gone home to our apartment in Brooklyn, and waited for her like I'd planned. But something in her posture, in the way she leaned forward with that conspiratorial energy, made me stay, made me step closer to the archway, just outside their line of sight. "So when's he finally going to propose?" one of them asked. I recognized her voice. Melissa, the creative director. Emma's answer came quick, almost rehearsed. "God, I hope never." The other women laughed, but it wasn't the comfortable kind. It was uncertain, waiting for clarification. "I'm serious," Emma continued. And now her voice had that edge I'd heard her use with difficult clients. Clinical, efficient. "David's sweet, don't get me wrong. He's stable. But marry him? I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life wondering what I missed out on." The champagne arrived. I watched the waiter pour as Emma kept talking. "He teaches high school history. He makes $48,000 a year. He thinks a nice evening is Thai food and a documentary. I mean, come on." I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, but I didn't move. Couldn't move. "Then why are you with him?" another voice asked. "Sarah, I think." "From legal." Emma shrugged, took a long sip. "Because he adores me. Because he's there. Because I'm 29 and my mother won't stop asking questions. And having a boyfriend keeps everyone quiet. But marriage? That's permanent. That's me settling. And I'm not ready to settle." She said it like she was discussing quarterly projections. Like I was a line item she could optimize later. Hey, before we go any further, welcome. If this story already has your blood boiling, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to know who's riding this journey with me. Now, back to the moment everything changed. I left the Wellington Club without my coat. Took the subway back to Brooklyn in my shirt sleeves. January wind cutting through the fabric like her words had cut through everything I thought I knew. When I got home, the apartment we'd shared for 18 months felt different. Smaller. Every photograph on the wall, every piece of furniture we'd picked out together at that place in Red Hook, all of it suddenly looked like set dressing. Like props in a performance I hadn't realized I was watching. I sat on the couch we'd bought last spring, the one she'd insisted on even though it cost half my monthly paycheck, and I did something I hadn't done since my father died. I cried. Not the loud, cathartic kind. The silent kind that makes your chest hurt and your hands shake. Then I stopped, because somewhere between the second and third tear, something else arrived. Clarity. Emma came home around 11. I heard her key in the lock, her heels on the hardwood, the familiar sounds of her evening routine. She found me still on the couch, laptop open, papers spread across the coffee table. "Hey, babe," she said, bending to kiss my forehead. She smelled like expensive perfume and champagne. "Didn't think you'd still be up. How was your evening?" I looked up at her. Really looked. At the woman I'd spent 3 years loving, planning with, building what I thought was a future with. She had no idea. No idea that I'd been there. No idea what I'd heard. No idea that the man she thought was stable, predictable, safe David was already gone. "It was educational," I said. She laughed, missing the weight in my voice entirely, and headed toward the bedroom. I'm exhausted. Marketing conference drinks always destroy me. Coming to bed. In a bit, I said. Just finishing some work. What she didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about in any real detail, was what that work actually meant. Emma knew I taught AP History at Franklin High. She knew I made $48,000 a year, because she'd seen my tax returns when we moved in together and made a face I'd pretended not to notice. What she didn't know was that my father, who'd passed 2 years before I met her, had been a patent attorney specializing in educational technology. What she didn't know was that 3 years ago, right around the time Emma and I started dating, I developed a digital curriculum platform called History Track using his old notes and my own teaching experience. What she didn't know was that I'd licensed that platform to the New York Department of Education as a pilot program. And what she definitely didn't know was that 6 months ago, that pilot program had gone statewide, and then 3 weeks ago, it had been acquired by Pearson Education for $12 million. The first payment, $8 million after taxes and legal fees, had hit my account 4 days ago. I'd been planning to tell her this weekend. Had the whole thing mapped out. Dinner reservation at that French place she loved in Manhattan, the one with the tasting menu she'd hinted about for months. I was going to tell her everything. Show her the statements. Explain that we could finally do all the things she talked about. Travel. That apartment in Manhattan she'd pointed out. The life she actually wanted. I'd even bought a ring. 3 carats, platinum band, from the jeweler her mother had mentioned once in passing. It was in my sock drawer, wrapped in the receipt that had made my hands shake when I signed it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and I started making lists. Not angry lists, not revenge fantasies, just practical inventories of our shared life and how to cleanly separate it. The apartment lease was in my name. I'd signed it 2 months before she moved in. The furniture we'd bought together, I had receipts for everything. The utilities all in my name. Her name wasn't on anything except the Wi-Fi account she'd insisted on upgrading to the premium tier. By dawn, I had a plan. Not a dramatic one. Not cruel. Just methodical. The kind of plan you make when you're a teacher used to breaking complex information into manageable steps. Step 1 was the simplest. I stopped talking about us. Not in an obvious way. Just quietly. When my colleague Marcus asked Monday morning if Emma and I had plans for Valentine's Day, I said, "Not sure yet." Instead of launching into the story I'd been rehearsing about the restaurant. When my mother called that Tuesday and asked if Emma would be coming to Easter dinner in Connecticut, I said, "I'll have to check her schedule," instead of confirming like I normally would. Step 2 took more precision. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, transferred everything except 2 months of expenses, changed my direct deposit, moved all documentation related to History Track and the Pearson acquisition to a safety deposit box Emma didn't know existed. I updated my beneficiaries, my emergency contacts, my will. Every legal thread that connected us, I quietly unraveled. Emma noticed nothing. She was too busy with her VP track at the marketing firm, too focused on her own trajectory to pay attention to mine. We still had dinner together most nights. Still watched shows on the couch. Still had sex on weekends. But I was watching her now with different eyes. Seeing the way she checked her phone during conversations. How she talked about her future without using the word we. How she'd redirect any conversation about long-term plans to something vague and non-committal. 3 weeks after the Wellington Club, she came home excited about something. "Babe, you'll never guess what happened," she said, dropping her bag and practically bouncing into the kitchen where I was making pasta. "Melissa's brother has a house in Cabo. He's offering it to us for a week in March. All-inclusive resort next door, private beach, the whole thing. Can you get time off?" I stirred the sauce, keeping my voice level. Probably not. State testing is in March. I'm proctoring and we're short-staffed. Her face fell in that practiced way. Disappointed but understanding. Right? Of course. School stuff. She pulled out her phone. Well, maybe I'll see if some of the girls want to go. Make it a girls' trip. I watched her type out a message, probably to the same women who'd been at that table. The same women who'd heard her say she'd rather die than marry me. You should definitely go, I said. You've been working hard. You deserve it. She looked up, surprised. Usually I pushed back on these things, worried about the cost, about time apart. But I wasn't that David anymore. I was someone else now. Someone she'd never actually bothered to meet. She kissed my cheek. You're the best, you know that? I smiled and said nothing. That night, I booked a meeting with a real estate attorney. Started looking at apartments in Manhattan. Not for us. Just for me. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what happens next is when she finally realized who she'd been underestimating all along. The unraveling happened faster than I expected. In early March, while Emma was in Cabo posting bikini photos and sunset cocktails to Instagram, I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom in Tribeca. Floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the Hudson, building with a doorman who didn't blink when I paid the first year up front in cash. I hired movers for the day she was scheduled to return. Professional crew. The kind that wraps everything in cloth and treats your belongings like museum pieces. I took only what was mine. The books, the records, my father's old desk, my clothes, my personal items. I left her everything we'd bought together. The couch, the bed, the kitchen table, all of it. I didn't want anything that carried the weight of those 3 years. On the kitchen counter, I left an envelope. Inside was a check for 3 months' rent, enough to cover her while she figured things out, since the lease was in my name and I was terminating it. There was also a letter, typed, not handwritten. Simple, direct, no emotion. Emma, I've moved out. The lease on this apartment ends in 90 days. I've paid through that period to give you time to find a new place. All shared utilities will be transferred to your name or canceled by the end of the month. I've removed my belongings but left everything we purchased together for you to keep or dispose of as you see fit. I heard what you said at the Wellington Club in January. About how you'd rather die than marry me. About how I'm just stable and there. About how you're not ready to settle. I'm writing this to let you know that you won't have to settle. You won't have to wonder what you're missing. You're free. I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for. Take care of yourself. David. I didn't mention the money. Didn't mention History Track or Pearson or any of it. What would be the point? She'd made her assessment of my worth based on a salary she could Google and a life she found boring. Nothing I said now would change the fact that she'd never seen me as enough. I left the key on top of the envelope and walked out of that Brooklyn apartment for the last time. Emma called 47 times the day she got back. Texted over 100 messages. I watched them come in from my new apartment, sitting in an Eames chair I'd bought that afternoon, drinking scotch older than our relationship. The messages progressed through predictable stages. Confusion, anger, bargaining, more anger, accusations, then finally panic. David, please. We need to talk about this. You can't just leave like this. 3 years and you don't even have the decency to do this in person? Call me, please. I didn't block her number. I just didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd already said it all that night at the Wellington Club. She'd already told me exactly what I was worth to her. About 6 weeks later, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop in Midtown. I was meeting with my financial advisor, going over some investment strategies when I saw her in line. She saw me at the same moment, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, then discomfort. She approached anyway. David, hey. Long time. I stood, shook her hand. Professional. Distant. Melissa. How are you? She glanced at the folder on my table, the one with the Merrill Lynch logo visible on the tab. Back to my face. I'm good. Listen, I don't know if this is appropriate, but Emma's been pretty devastated. She won't tell us what happened, just that you left. Is there any chance you two might work things out? I took a sip of my coffee, considered my words. I don't think so, I said. Sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to believe them. Something in her expression shifted. A flash of guilt, maybe. Understanding. She'd been there that night. She'd heard what Emma said. She knew. Right? She said quietly. Well, take care of yourself, David. As she walked away, I heard her phone ring. Saw her answer say Emma's name. I went back to my meeting and didn't think about it again. 3 months after I moved out, Marcus cornered me in the faculty lounge at Franklin High. Man, you've been holding out on us, he said, grinning. How long were you planning to keep the whole tech millionaire thing quiet? I looked up from the essays I was grading. I wasn't keeping it quiet, just wasn't relevant. He laughed. Not relevant? David, the New York Times did a feature on History Track last week. They mentioned you by name, called you an innovator in educational technology. Teachers are talking about you like you're the guy who finally understood how to make history engaging for digital natives. That's not relevant. I shrugged. The platform's good. That's what matters. The rest is just noise. But Marcus wasn't wrong. The Times piece had triggered a cascade. Education blogs picked it up. NPR did a segment. I got invited to speak at a conference in Boston about the intersection of traditional teaching and digital innovation. Someone from the Gates Foundation reached out about a potential partnership. My life was changing in ways I'd never imagined when I was building the platform in my father's memory. In ways I'd never needed Emma to validate. The money had changed things, sure. But more than that, it had revealed something. I'd spent 3 years with someone who'd looked at my salary and decided that was the sum of my worth. Who'd never asked about my projects, my passions, my work beyond the paycheck. Who'd never bothered to see me as anything more than stable, safe, boring David. When I'd had nothing to hide, when I'd been completely honest about every part of my life, she'd been planning her exit strategy, keeping me around until something better showed up, treating our relationship like a placeholder she could delete when the real opportunity arrived. I was at a fundraiser in September, one of those Upper East Side charity galas where tickets cost more than most people's monthly rent, when I saw her. Emma. She was across the ballroom, wearing a black dress I didn't recognize, talking to a man in an expensive suit who kept touching her lower back in that possessive way that made my jaw tighten. Not because I was jealous, because I recognized the dynamic. She was performing again, laughing that specific laugh, playing the role she thought would get her where she wanted to go. Our eyes met across the room. I watched the recognition hit her, watched her take in my tailored tuxedo, the confident way I stood talking to a state senator and 2 board members from Columbia University's education department. Watched her do the math. She excused herself from the man in the suit and started walking toward me. I could have left, slipped into the crowd, avoided the confrontation entirely. But I'd spent 3 years being the person who made things comfortable for her. I was done with that. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk without the crowd overhearing. David. Her voice was controlled, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you moved in these circles. I smiled politely, the way you smile at an acquaintance whose name you're struggling to remember. A lot of things you didn't know, apparently. She flinched. That's not fair. You left without any explanation. You just disappeared. 3 years and you couldn't even talk to me. I glanced at my watch. Cartier, a gift to myself last month. I left you a letter. I believe I was pretty clear. Emma's composure cracked slightly. That letter was cold. It was cruel. You didn't even give me a chance to explain, to fight for us. The words came out before I could stop them. Quiet but sharp. You told your friends you'd rather die than marry me. You said I was just stable and there. That you were with me to keep people from asking questions. What exactly was I supposed to fight for, Emma? The privilege of being your placeholder. Her face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it. Around us, the gala continued. Music and laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. All the sounds of a world she wanted so desperately to be part of. You heard that, she whispered. It wasn't a question. I heard it. Every word. I was picking up my coat at the Wellington Club. You were holding court with Melissa and Sarah and whoever else. Being very clear about how temporary I was. How much you were settling. A tear ran down her cheek, ruining her makeup. David, I didn't mean it. Not really. I was just, I don't know, performing. Trying to sound sophisticated. They were all talking about their marriages and their divorces, and I felt like I needed to say something interesting. I looked at her for a long moment. At the woman I'd loved completely, who'd never quite loved me back. The sad thing, Emma, is I believe you. I believe you didn't mean it the way it sounded. But you still said it. And more than that, you believed it enough to say it out loud. You looked at what we had, at who I was, and you saw someone not quite good enough. Someone to keep around until you figured out what you really wanted. She was crying openly now. People were starting to notice. So what, you just became this? She gestured at me, at my clothes, at the world I now inhabited. You just decided to prove me wrong? To show me what I missed out on? I shook my head. I didn't become anything, Emma. This is who I always was. I built History Track 3 years ago, right when we met. I've been working on it, developing it, licensing it the entire time we were together. I just never told you because you never asked. You never asked what I was working on. You never asked about my projects or my goals beyond what was on my W-2. You saw a high school teacher making $48,000 a year and you made your assessment. That's on you, not me. She stood there, tears streaming, understanding finally hitting her. The money, she whispered. You had it the whole time? Not the whole time. The acquisition closed while we were together. But the platform, the work, the vision, all of that was there from the beginning. You just couldn't see it. I stepped back, creating distance. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. But it's not going to be with me. It was never going to be with me, and we both know it. You just wanted me to be the one who didn't know it yet. I turned and walked back to the senator and the board members, back to conversations about expanding educational access and innovative teaching models. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me, I heard her heels clicking away across the marble floor, getting quieter until they disappeared entirely into the crowd. 6 months later, I was having dinner with a woman named Claire. She taught literature at a private school in Manhattan, had a master's degree from Yale, and thought my passion for making history accessible to struggling students was the most attractive thing about me. She didn't know about the money. Not yet. I'd tell her eventually when it felt right. But for now, she knew me as David, the teacher who'd built something meaningful, who cared about his students, who lit up when talking about the moment a kid finally understood why the Constitutional Convention mattered. We were at a small Italian place in the West Village, sharing carbonara and talking about a book she'd just finished, when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't have saved but recognized instantly. I heard you're seeing someone. I hope she appreciates what she has. I never did. I'm sorry for that. Truly. You deserved better. You deserved someone who saw you. I read it twice. Felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication. Just a distant echo of something that used to hurt. I deleted the message and put my phone away. Across the table, Claire was laughing about something, her eyes bright in the candlelight, completely unaware of the ghost that had just tried to reappear. "Everything okay?" she asked. I smiled. "Real this time." "Yeah," I said. "Everything's exactly right." Emma had looked at a salary and seen a ceiling. She'd looked at stability and seen boring. She'd looked at 3 years of partnership and seen a temporary situation she could upgrade when something better came along. What she'd missed, what she'd never bothered to look for, was the person underneath all of that. The person who'd honored his father's legacy by turning old notes and teaching passion into something that would help thousands of students. The person who'd valued their relationship enough to plan a future, to buy a ring, to build toward something permanent. The person who, when shown exactly what he was worth to someone he loved, had the dignity to walk away instead of begging to be valued. That was the thing about being underestimated. People assumed it meant you lacked something, that you weren't smart enough, ambitious enough, successful enough to be worth their full attention. But sometimes, being underestimated just meant you were dealing with someone who'd mistaken quiet confidence for weakness, who'd confused contentment with lack of drive, who'd never learned that the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones who don't need to prove anything to anyone. I never told Emma what she'd lost, never laid out the numbers or the opportunities or the life we could have had. There was no point. She'd already shown me who she was that night at the Wellington Club, and I'd believed her. Everything that came after was just me acting on that belief. Quietly, methodically, with the same careful attention to detail I brought to everything else in my life. She wanted someone exciting, someone who matched her vision of success, someone who looked good in the story she told herself about her future. And she'd gotten exactly that. A string of relationships with men who checked those boxes, who took her to the right places and said the right things and fit the narrative she'd constructed. What she'd given up was someone who'd actually seen her, who'd loved her not for what she represented but for who she actually was, who'd been building something real while she was busy performing for an audience that didn't matter. That was her choice to make, and mine was to let her make it, without drama, without revenge, without any of the theatrics she probably expected. Just a clean exit, a quiet door closing, a life continuing forward without her in it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well, building something meaningful, finding someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway, becoming the person you were always capable of being, with or without anyone's validation. I'd done that. I was doing that. And Emma, wherever she was, whatever she was chasing, was no longer part of that equation. She was just a story I told sometimes, a lesson I'd learned, a chapter that had closed the moment I walked out of that Brooklyn apartment and into the life I'd been building all along. The one she'd never bothered to ask about. The one that had been right there in front of her the entire time, waiting for someone who cared enough to see it. Before you go, I need you to do something for me. If this story hit you the way I think it did, smash that like button. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in David's position. Would you have left quietly like he did? Or would you have confronted Emma directly? And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is full of stories about people who refused to be underestimated, who turned their pain into power, who walked away from people who couldn't see their worth. Hit that subscribe button and join this community. More stories like this are coming, and you won't want to miss a single one.